Search operations at the Seoul disaster site continues, but hope is dimming amid fears that bodies of the missing may not be all recovered from inside the ferry. Two subway trains collided in Seoul Friday afternoon, injuring some 170 passengers. North Korea replaces its top military commander. What does it say about Kim Jong-un's grip on power and the future of inter-Korean ties? We find out.
Hello and welcome to Primetime News. I'm Sean Lim.
And I am Kang Tae-ri. The search for the missing at the Seoul disaster site continues with operations there well into their 17th day.
For the latest, let's turn to our Kim Ji-yeon. So a body was found today 4.5 kilometers away from the search site, and that's raising questions of whether we should expand the parameters of the search.
That may be the case. There are growing concerns that the bodies of the victims might never be found, as some were clearly carried away from the accident site by currents. It's hard to predict which way the bodies may drift, but also just how far the search area may need to be expanded. Some of the victims' belongings have been found as far as 30 kilometers away from the ferry.
And there was a senior employee of the ferry company who actually admitted today that he knew the firm was overloading the cargo onto the ship.
Right. One of the employees that was questioned today admitted that he knew overloading cargo on the ferry could cause it to capsize. The employee, identified as Kim, was in charge of loading cargo onto the Cheonghaejin Marine Company's vessels. And earlier in the probe, the captain of the ship, Lee Jun-seok, apparently told prosecutors that he had warned Kim that there was too much cargo. So speculation is brewing that the company simply chose not to heed those warnings for financial profits.
Well, speaking of the allegations of greed in this case, how is the investigation going into the de facto owner of this company?
Well, a close aide to owner Yu has been put into custody today, a first in this investigation. Song Guk-bin, the CEO of a cosmetics company called The Panda, was detained for embezzling funds worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The Panda holds a large stake in Cheonhaeji, which is the biggest shareholder of the ferry operator. Prosecutors say Song has induced losses to one of Yu's ghost companies by paying a large sum of commission fees, saying it was used for business consulting. But with Yu behind bars, prosecutors are expected to speed up its probe into key figures connected to him. An ultimatum was given to one of Q's sons to answer a summons by next Thursday after he refused to answer to summons for the second time today.
All right, next Thursday, we'll keep an eye on that story. Thank you very much, Ji-yeon, at the top of the story. And one apology may not be enough for President Park Geun-hye, who says she believes it's her duty to officially apologize for the ferry disaster.
A meeting with religious leaders on Friday, the president said she will do all she can to ensure that the missing passengers are found and once again pledged for an overhaul of the national disaster response system. Her apology for the government's poor management that came earlier this week was criticized because it was not addressed to the people, but rather came during a cabinet meeting. Well, in a time when campaigning for next month's local elections should be dominating headlines, the ferry disaster has cast a long shadow over the political arena.
Exactly, and that's changed election strategy as well. To win over voters, rival parties are doing what they can to distance themselves from the government. And as our Choi Yoo-sun tells us, the ruling party could take a hit come election day.
The Sewol-ho ferry disaster has completely overshadowed the upcoming local elections in June. With only about a month to go before the polls, the ruling and opposition parties are keeping their campaigning relatively low-key as public criticism of political leaders grows over their inability to cope with such disasters. The latest surveys show poor government handling of the man-made disaster dragged President Park Geun-hye's popularity ratings to below 50% for the first time in a year. In the past, it's been the government and ruling party that have suffered the most politically from a disaster, giving the opposition an upper hand. But this time around, public mistrust spreads from the government to both ends of the political spectrum. In a move likely intended to distance itself, the ruling Saenuri Party on Friday criticized the government for its mishandling of the crisis. Party floor leader Choi Kyung-hwan then urged officials to mobilize to help the families of the missing passengers who have not been working since the Sewol-ho disaster on April 16th. The opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, on the other hand, said onus of the disaster falls on the government and its absence of a sufficient disaster management control tower. Co-leader Kim Inchul said instead of waiting for the government to determine who's responsible for the ferry's capsizing, the National Assembly should lead the efforts. Despite the political blame game, political observers say the outcome of June 4th elections may be determined more by voter turnout, as many Koreans still feel despondent over the tragedy. Choi Yusun, Arirang News.
Now, moving on to another accident that occurred this Friday afternoon here in Seoul. Two subway trains collided with each other, leaving around 200 people injured.
Let's go directly to our Kwon So-ah for the latest. So, So-ah, how serious has the situation become? It seems like the number of injured has gone up.
That's right. As the story first broke, around 40 were reportedly injured, but now the number stands at around 200, and this includes 2 foreigners. Around 150 are getting medical help at local hospitals, and most of the injuries are reportedly minor, but at least 2 are said to have suffered bone fractures, and one of the drivers involved in the accident was seriously injured. This after a subway train traveling on line 2 that was heading from Sangwangsimni Station to Hongsu Station crashed into a stationary train at around 3:30 p.m. Korea time. Witnesses in the second train said it was slowing down and stopped and started a number of times before it crashed with a loud bang into the subway car ahead of it. Witnesses or passengers said they did not receive any instructions, nor did they hear any announcements for about 20 minutes, causing a lot of confusion and chaos. And some of them actually said they had to force open the doors themselves. But the CEO of Seoul Metro said that about 5 minutes after the crash, the first announcements by officials were made in both subways. Passengers were evacuated 30 minutes after the accident.
Now, do we know what caused the two trains to collide?
Well, Seoul Metro authorities said they will first focus on the recovery process, which, according to the CEO, should have ended by now, actually. Investigations into the cause will come next, but there is the possibility that the so-called automatic train stop system was not functioning properly and that the driver in the second subway could not see the subway ahead of him due to the curved tracks. That's all I have for now, but we will have more updates later on.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Chae-ri from the heart of Seoul.
News begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
North Korea has a new number 2 within the regime. Choi Ryong-hae is out and Hwang Byung-seo is in as a top military commander. No word yet on the reason for the sudden shakeup. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
Out goes Choi Ryong-hae, in comes Hwang Byung-seo. North Korea has replaced its top military commander in a sign the regime's young leader may be struggling to maintain his grip on power. Reporting on a May Day event Friday, the North Korean Central News Agency introduced Hwang as the country's military Politburo chief. North Korea watchers are keeping a close eye on Hwang, who was promoted to the position of vice marshal less than 2 weeks after becoming a 4-star general. Why Choi was replaced remains unclear, but Kim Jong-un's recent criticism of military officers suggests it could be more than Choi's reported health problems. The latest power shift comes less than 6 months since the execution of Kim's uncle Chang Sung-taek, and some see it as a sign the young leader's grip on power is still shaky. But South Korea's Unification Ministry says it's too early to jump to any conclusions.
We were certain about the purge of Jang Song-taek and the dismissal of Lee Yong-ho because it was reported after the extended meeting of the Political Bureau of the Party Central Committee. So far, there have been no such reports on Chae Ryong-hae.
Meanwhile, hopes for better inter-Korean ties are fading fast amid the regime's ongoing threats of a fourth nuclear test and cross-border slandering. North Korea has been stepping up its aggressive rhetoric since U.S. President Barack Obama's visit to Seoul last week, when he vowed to stand shoulder to shoulder with South Korea against any provocation by the North. Experts say this is part of North Korea's efforts to find its way back to the negotiating table. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Washington has tapped its next ambassador to South Korea. His name is Mark Lippert. He's currently the chief of staff to Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel and has been a close advisor to President Barack Obama for years. Shin Se-min has more on his profile.
Mark Lippert, one of U.S. President Barack Obama's oldest and closest aides, has been nominated to the United States' next ambassador to South Korea. Multiple diplomatic sources say the U.S. government notified Seoul of the impending announcement during President Obama's visit to the nation last week. If confirmed by the U.S. Senate, Lippert will replace the current ambassador Sung Kim in the second half of the year. Kim, whose 3-year term is nearing an end, is expected to return to the State Department in September. As for Lippert's credentials, the 41-year-old is currently Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel's chief of staff. At the age of 32, he became the foreign policy advisor to then-Senator Barack Obama. 4 years later, he was appointed as National Security Council Chief of Staff and in 2012 as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs. Experts anticipate that Lippert will strengthen relations between Seoul and Washington. Former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs Kurt Campbell was quoted as saying that South Korea would be lucky to have Lippert, who is close to the president, as U.S. ambassador. Lippert is expected to focus on bolstering trilateral cooperation between the U.S., Korea, and Japan, with an emphasis on rebalancing power through stronger security ties. The aim would also be to prevent China from taking the lead in North Korea-related matters, such as when it comes to countering threats out of Pyongyang. According to Pentagon officials, Lippert believes that security cooperation and historical disputes should be approached separately. This could be a concern to Korea due to sensitivity over Tokyo's interpretation of history and territorial claims. Nevertheless, South Korea's embassy has welcomed Lippert's nomination as he has a good reputation among diplomats in the country. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
A new report from Korea's central bank shows that the nation's annual growth is close to matching its potential growth rate. That's a positive sign for the economy, but it could mean a possible rate hike later this year. Hwang Ji-ae explains.
The Bank of Korea has used a new way of calculating the nation's output gap, and results showed a smaller margin between the economy's actual growth and potential growth compared to the previous method. The new method introduced in the central bank's report on Friday is aimed at giving a more accurate picture on the economy and helping policymakers draw plans to promote greater economic activities while preempting asset bubbles. It reveals the Korean economy is growing closer to its maximum possible growth rate at which the economy can grow without triggering inflation and financial market instability. And with the new data showing a potential closing of gap between actual growth and potential growth, experts point to a possible interest rate hike later this year.
Output gap is an indicator for inflation. There was a wide negative output gap in the past several years, but this is expected to be reversed by the end of this year, which is expected to lead the central bank to tighten its monetary policies.
The new central bank governor Lee Ju-yeol also said in his debut as the top monetary policymaker last month that a debate on an increase in interest rates should begin if the output gap closes and upside risks to inflation mount. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
So how much faith should we put into the signs of rising optimism about the Korean economy? Joining us now is Dr. Kim Inchul, Professor of International Economics at Seongkyungkwan University. Welcome.
So, Professor, let's start off with some of the data points that we got yesterday. For the month of April, exports went up by 9% on year, and some say April CPI also helped to ease concerns about the deflationary pressure in the country. How did you read them?
First of all, fortunately, Korea made a record high performance in exports. The amount of export in April was a little bit more than $50 billion. And why? I mean, there was a record high, primarily because the quality of the Korean export products are pretty high. I mean, the Korean products are very popular among the global consumers. And the second reason why it was so high in April was because of the base effect. Because the amount in April last year was a bit small in scale. So over the year, from April last year to April this year, it made a big jump.
So people are optimistic, but do you think it's really realistic for Korea's economy to achieve the 4% target set by the BOK? And what is the BOK banking on? What are they hoping is going to improve in the global economy?
Okay. To achieve a target rate of 4% or 3.9%, export, of course, will play an important role. But as the government has been saying that, we need to strike a balance between export activity and domestic spending. Now, the way the BOK projects the future, the 2014 growth, target of 4%, 3.9%. Was that they made that projection before the ferry disaster. So because the ferry tragedy is having tremendous impact on the economy, especially the second quarter, because people just stopped spending. They just canceled their travel plans and all different events and programs.
I certainly feel caution in your comments, and we also often come across headlines, talking about the gap between the actual headline economic recovery figures and the degree of recovery that average Koreans are feeling, consumers, job seekers, and businessmen. Why is that? Is that a Korea thing? No, not. It's not the happening that is applicable to Korea only, because it has become a global fashion or fad that export. Used to create a lot of jobs, but now the export produce not many jobs, just jobless export and jobless growth.
Well, the new BOK chief will convene his second monetary policy meeting next week. There were no changes to the base rate last time. What do you expect this time around?
Well, everybody is aware that the economy is going to be really going down and way below the target growth rate. So something has to be done policy-wise. So I would hope that the Bank of Korea would do something like, changing or lowering the interest rate a little bit. Although they can, jack it up later. But this time or next week, perhaps a little bit of, decrease in the base rate is expected.
All right. Well, we'll find out next Thursday. Thank you for your insights and joining us today. Thank you
it's been my pleasure.
Families waiting to hear about their missing loved ones on board the ill-fated Malaysia Airlines plane have been told to go home.
We go now to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, I'm sure that didn't go over very well.
That's right. The families were visibly distraught after being informed on Thursday by Malaysia Airlines that the support center for relatives in Beijing would be closed. The company explained that the move was meant to encourage relatives to receive updates from the comfort of their homes. More than 100 of the 239 passengers on board Flight 370 were from China. Meanwhile, the search operation continues involving satellite ships and high-tech underwater equipment. But so far, it's failed to turn up any trace of the Boeing 777, which disappeared on March 8th. Investigators say they believe the plane's wreckage lies at the bottom of the southern Indian Ocean. Australian Search Chief Angus Houston said on Friday that the probability of finding the missing jetliner has dropped, but he remains hopeful that the underwater bluefin drone may find something by the end of this month. Moving on to China, where the nation is reeling from yet another mass knife attack. Security remains high at the main train station of China's western city of Urumqi in the Xinjiang region, 2 days after an attack which killed 3 people and injured 79. Train services resumed on Thursday despite the overnight explosion and stabbing spree. The U.S. State Department has condemned Wednesday's violence, saying that it appeared to be an act of terrorism. The Chinese government says the suicide bombing was carried out by at least 2 suspects with a history of religious extremism. The brutal incident was the 3rd such high-profile attack against civilians in 7 months. And turning to the deepening crisis in Ukraine, pro-Russian activists clashed with riot police in the eastern city of Donetsk before taking control of the prosecutor's office. The protesters now occupy a number of government buildings in dozens of other flashpoint cities. The move comes as the Ukrainian government launches a military operation to retake the town of Slavyansk from separatist groups. Ukraine's Interior Ministry says 1 helicopter has been shot down with missile launchers and that at least 1 pilot was killed. Ukraine's acting president Oleksandr Turchinov announced on Thursday that the country would reinstate military conscription in response to the growing unrest. Russia has warned that any assaults by Ukrainian troops in the region would have, quote, catastrophic consequences. That wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here next week.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. After spending most of her life in figure skating and having been in the public spotlight for the past few years, Korea's ice queen Kim Jong-un will take the ice once again for her retirement event. Opening over the weekend on Sunday, she hosted a press event which included a look at the rehearsals. There, the 23-year-old Olympic champion said that she wanted to make the ice show her best to date and hoped that it helps to heal the nation still grieving over the Sewol-ho ferry accident. The show continues on through Tuesday. And heading to the greens, the first round is in the books for both the PGA and LPGA's tournaments. First, it's the Wells Fargo Championship. Angel Cabrera emerges with the early lead at 6 under, while Phil Mickelson and Martin Flores trail by a stroke. Meanwhile, over in Texas for the North Texas LPGA shootout, Suzanne Pedersen returned from injury to top the leaderboard at 5 under. Michelle Wie and 5 others share the second spot. Now going to the NBA hardcourt, the first round of the playoffs has been robust to say the least, with a bunch of series going the distance. Most recently, the Pacers, Hawks, Clippers, Warriors, and Thunder, Grizzlies series are all going to deciding Game 7s, with 3 others heading to Game 6s. Only the Wizards and the Heat from the East have advanced. Now fatigue emerges as an issue, with 3 rounds still left to play. And closing up, the KBO takes a break to make way for games on Monday, which is Children's Day, a national holiday here in Korea. So if you're here in the nation, why not head to the ballpark? And with that, have a great weekend. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
During the day, we enjoyed perfect spring weather here in Seoul.
For more, we connect live to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Guys, make sure to keep an umbrella handy as it is now drizzling outdoors. Shifting our focus for a bit, conditions on Jindo have worsened compared to yesterday. Visibility remains low at 3.7 kilometers with strong winds blowing at 11.8 meters per second. Well, today marks the last of spring tides. From tomorrow through Tuesday is when we'll get mean tides, and during then, tidal currents will slow down to 0.2 of a meter every day. Over our 4-day long weekend, it looks like we'll get a mix of rain and sun. Now, Sunday is shaping up to be a rainy one, and fine dust may kick in between Sunday and Monday. As for our current conditions, the central regions will briefly be under the influence of a low-pressure trough from the north, and this is exactly why we're seeing showers in the central regions. Now, tomorrow looks to be a wonderful and sunny day, so make sure to make the most out of this lovely weather while you can. Taking a look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul peaks at 19 degrees while Daegu and Gwangju reach 24. Taking a look at other places, Jeju hits 19 degrees, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out at 16 and 12. Well, that's all for now, but I'll be back with more after midnight.
And that wraps up this edition of Primetime News. I'm Sean Lim.
And I am Kang Chae-ri. Thank you very much for watching.